theory on how everyone watches season 1 of Black Butler. And obviously, this doesn't apply to everyone, but I think a large portion of people watch it this way. And that is, they start the season the way you normally do. They go through the Grell episodes. If they skip the Pluto arc, they might stop in for the Drossel arc. And then after the Drossel arc, which leads directly into the Curry arc, they just watch the Curry arc. And then they stop it halfway through the 15th episode when it starts to get weird and stops following the manga. So basically, most people watch, the first 6 episodes, maybe an episode or two, up until episode 13 through 15, and then maybe they'll remember the fact that Sebastian had to fuck a nun, so they'll go in and watch the cult episodes. If you watch the cult arc, you might as well finish through the whole thing, watch the fake out CL death, watch Sebastian be a little bitch, and watch Ash get absolutely decimated. And then, you watch the end of that arc, and you see CL die, and you go, okay, that's it, bye. And that's how people usually watch season 1. People watch season 2 by starting the first episode and then immediately turning it off. And it makes sense. I mean, season 1 has been time and time again called boring, repetitive, tone-breaking. I mean, we have a naked dog man running around. It's distractingly bad, and, if people want to rewatch Black Butler, they want to rewatch the good parts of Black Butler, right? Well, here, that's where they're wrong. That's where common perception fails people, because the best parts of Black Butler Season 1 are not the parts that follow the manga. Oh no. They're actually the parts that are so deeply entrenched in anime original content that they loop back around to being extremely relevant to the current manga chapters. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, I think you should watch my Season 2 video and cry. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about episode 16, the episode that is single-handedly one of the best pieces of television associated with Black Butler Season 1, and one of the most important episodes to the whole thing as a whole. It's the little ghost kids in the castle episode. I swear I'm not making this up, I'm not delusional, this is extremely important. That's part of the reason why I'm sitting in direct fucking sunlight, because it makes me look a little ghostly. Ooh. Let's get on to the episode. What the fuck happens in this episode? I bet you don't know because you didn't see it, or you haven't seen it in years, or you haven't seen it in ages, or you don't even watch Black Butler. Why are you here? Sebastian opens the door, and he's wearing very different clothes. His hair is long and pulled back. He looks a little bit like one of Claude's beta designs mixed with his Book of the Atlantic design. Someone really wanted Sebastian to have long hair, but I won't get into that. So he walks in, and we see on the bed that there are 2 people. And as he's pouring the tea for the day, he addresses one of the people as young master. However, the boy in the bed refuses that and tells him to call him something else. Sebastian nods and apologizes and says, "Of course, your majesty."
I have prepared your tea, master.
It is not how I referred to.
Please forgive the mistake. I'm sorry. Your majesty.
And it pans out and we see the 2 boys in the bed. One of them's a little older than the other, and the other one is very small, and he's cradling what appears to be a human skull. Roll intro! The real narrative purpose of this episode is, I guess, to show CL and Sebastian's dynamic when the 2 of them are stressed to their limits, and also more literally to show the audience CL's brand, because the first scene with him is him getting out of the bath, and we see that for the anime canon it has been relocated to the front of his chest instead of his back, which, I mean, Book of Circus hadn't come out yet, so we didn't have the exact canonical placement of it. And the brand itself was important because we saw that people in the cult arc were marked with the exact same symbol. And to emphasize that, the actual Season 2 opening has a few visuals changed to show off the brand. So, congratulations, we're 2 minutes into the episode, the brand has already been shown, all the foreshadowing for the next arc has already been accomplished. So what the hell are they going to spend the rest of this 20-minute episode on? Well, Sebastian and CL are trying to gentrify the Ludlow Castle. they're trying to turn it into a hotel for the queen. Much in the same way that they were trying to turn the Hound town that Pluto was in into a resort. They really are just playing township, aren't they? Here's the issue, their castle renovation plans are being put on hold because their workers are going on strike. And that's because the workers keep seeing these little ghost children in the building. And so Ciel and Sebastian are like, okay, fuck, I guess we need to go check out the workplace conditions. And Ciel doesn't believe in ghosts, like, at all. Sebastian points it out and just goes, ooh, you believe in me, but you don't believe in ghosts? Wow. So they head on over there, they walk in, and they immediately see the ghost. And the ghost is Edward V. And he is not some, like, OC original anime character like Pluto or Drossel or Ash or Angela or Eloise or Claude or Hannah. No, this is a literal actual person that existed. It's like if they went to France and met Marie Antoinette. Like, this is wild. What's a historical character doing in Black Butler? I shouldn't say that. It's happened before. It's happened multiple times. It's one of the effects of having something that takes place in such an iconic era as the Victorian era. But anyway, they find out that Edward V's ghost is possessing this castle. And by the way, Edward V died when he was 12. So this is a 12-year-old boy. I know. Rest in peace. I know he's been dead for like 600 years, but you know, I think it's a level of just being also kind of sad. Because this was an actual child that was murdered and is now being put into child endangerment, the anime. I don't like that. That's a little icky. Does it make you feel icky? I don't know. But Edward died when he was 12 and Richard died when he was 9. There's this myth in England called The Princes in the Tower. And it's got a Wikipedia page for all the different stories that depict it. And Black Butler is there, you know? Like, there's a little epitaph right at the bottom where they mention how Black Butler shows these characters and portrays this myth. So as we go on forward through this, you're going to get a little bit of a history lesson. And you're also going to, you know, learn the many ways that, this is just kind of weird. Like, in the document of all of the different portrayals of this historical event that's actually, honest to God, a really important part of British history, you just have Black Butler. The window got annoying, so I'm now in the void. Anyway, so Ciel is a little bit put off by this, understandably, be it the strange 12-year-old and the outdated clothes and the even stranger 9-year-old holding the human remains. He is put off, but he knows his manners. Like any good British citizen, he knows he should address the king of respect, so he tries to talk his way out of the whole messy situation. Tries to go, hey, no, I'll compensate you for the house. Just let me turn it into a hotel, okay? We can negotiate. And Edward is not thrilled by this, but he's curious. So he's like, okay, let's play a game of chess. Well, if you win, I'll pack up, I'll leave, you can do whatever you want with the house. And if I win, I get your butler. We all saw how the episode started, so Ciel, chess genius extraordinaire, did not, in fact, win the one fucking game that is the main symbolism of this entire series. The specific way that he lost was because Edward cheated. So it would be really funny if he was actually just really bad at chess. Like, God, could you imagine? But no, that's not it. Edward is basically able to transform his little figurine into a different figurine, so he can go from having a knight to a queen. In the blink of an eye, and Ciel is really pissed off about that. He's like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you modding your chess pieces? I can't do that. Sebastian appears, and he's like, actually, Ciel, didn't, like, 10 episodes ago, you were talking about how you had a very special chess piece that could move however you wanted, and that piece was me, but was also your literal chess piece. So in fact, Edward is not cheating, and he's not modding his chess, because you modded your chess from the beginning. And then Ciel stares at Sebastian in horror, like, you bitch! Because he now has to give away his special chess piece. he has to share his toy with this other kid. It's Fairly Odd Parents all over again. Good God. It's really funny, this whole Ciel modding his chess pieces, because specifically in the other conversation he had about this, he was playing with Madame Red. Like, he was playing with his 30-year-old aunt, and they were playing chess, and then suddenly he like moved his knight across the board, and she was like, hey, that's illegal, and he was like, I do whatever I want because I'm the queen's guard dog. And it's like
that. That was against the rules, you know.
Indeed.
like, dude, that was such a little kid move right before Sebastian gets shepherded away by his new owners. Wow, Ciel really did sell Sebastian to One Direction. But before that could happen, Ciel calls Edward a liar, and Edward gets triggered about that. Like, he is so fucking pissed off with that word. His ghost powers suddenly light up, and, you know, he's just really fucking pissed.
Hey,
Sire.
don't you accuse me of lying. I hate lying.
Which... interesting. And this is the last little piece of commentary for that specific scene, but I think it's so funny that I don't think they knew that Edward was supposed to be 12. To add on to that, in the actor's OVA, he plays the role of the director, which, I mean, that's pretty cool. It's cool he shows up again, but he plays the role of the director, and he's barking orders at everyone, and you'd really expect him to be at least like 15 or 16 if he's going to be given a management position. I mean, obviously Ciel exists, but like, really, of his design and his voice, I don't think they check their history books, because this kid is 12. He was 12 when the real Edward V died, and I know that's a strange thing to get hung up on, but he was 12. He never had the chance to grow any older. See, this is why it's weird. This is specifically why it's weird when they put historical characters into this. Because we're having these conversations instead of, I don't know, talking about why the hell Richard has a human skull. Anyway, back to my tangent within a tangent. The voice actors in Black Butler are usually pretty good, but they were a little bit maybe misinformed on how old he was supposed to be, because they had a grown man voicing him. He was not doing a kid voice, like he was doing kind of a quiet voice, but it was still a man's voice. It wasn't one of those, you know, Izuku Midoriya situations where it's like, okay, yeah, that's an adult talking in a squeaky teenager voice. No, that was just a man. So during the entire chess match, you basically had like Brina Palencia, a grown woman, talking to this grown man. And it was very odd because it was just these two adults talking through the vessels of these little children. It's a little surreal. He sounds a bit better in the Japanese dub, I guess.
私が勝ったらその執事をもらう。お前が勝てば城は望み。
But this whole voice thing bothered me so much because I think part of the reason everyone forgets about this episode is because it doesn't register that Edward is supposed to be a parallel of Ciel, because you don't see Edward as an equal of Ciel's. You don't see him as a peer of Ciel's. Mostly because of the voice, because he doesn't sound like he's also a scared 12-year-old. He sounds like a, 20-something-year-old grown man, when in fact he is very small. So I was so annoyed by that I went over one of his scenes and I did some editing with the audio clips, and I basically tried to dub him over with some Aloise lines. I don't imagine he'd have an Aloise voice, but we'll get to that. So here's that.
I haven't changed a thing. I've preserved it all since Father's time. I had to.
Anyway, okay, so we've got our character profiles, kind of. We've got, Edward, 12, hates liars, a little soft-spoken, decently logical, decently friendly, protective of his younger brother. And then we have Richard, tiny, carries around human bones. That's the boy band that's gonna be Sebastian's new owners. So Edward is immediately like, hey, change your clothes, and Sebastian does. He changes his wardrobe to match the first scene from the episode, and he grows his hair out really long, which is a little odd because they didn't know he was a demon. So, How do you do that? But anyway, so he's excited, honestly. Like, you could argue that he was a little bit pissed off that CL sold him, but actually he seems to be having a pretty good time. He's got some new masters for him to mansplain to. There's a lot of scenes of him just showing off how cool of a butler he is. And then also, another added bonus, CL is absolutely miserable and cannot tie his own shoes. This episode is one of the strongest when it comes to the humor, mainly because the humor doesn't rely on everything going wrong comedically, Pluto's entire ass, or sexual harassment. As long as Black Butler steers clear of those last two, it's pretty funny. I will say I miss the servants, but, you know, this whole episode is a very this episode would not have been as good if it had been divided into 2 episodes. So as a self-contained story of only 4 characters to go around, it really does just work very well. So CL is moping around in the library. He's trying to figure out why the boys are even here, and he's basically reading up on the myth that, you know, about what happened. He's just like me for real last night on the Wikipedia page. And I mean, you have to admit, this is probably a very strange situation for him. For instance, he didn't know ghosts existed, and he also is someone who's had a lot of people die, so this probably is raising some very strange and concerning implications. You sure hope the dead don't come back to life in some horrible way. Is that foreshadowing for the cult part? I don't know, maybe it is. But he's hanging out in the library, and when suddenly Edward just sort of drops in and speaks to him, and they have a little bit of a one-on-one, grown man talking to grown woman through the puppeted bodies of little boys. Specifically, they talk about life and death and memory. Edward basically tells CL that he doesn't remember what happened the night he died, and he's got no need for vengeance. He's just existing simply, incapable of moving on, but also not wishing any ill will on everything that happened. Everyone's already dead. There's no point in it. He is stuck in this complete and total apathy of only his little brother and only this house. Meanwhile, CL is completely driven by his need for vengeance. As we'll later find out in the cult arc, he doesn't believe he has an identity outside of the vengeance. And as we'll find out in the final arc, he doesn't think he has a life worth living outside of this vengeance. But Edward does have drive. He wants to help his little brother reach heaven. That's all that matters to him. And so CL tells him that he thinks Edward is very kind.
What a kind man you are.
What do you mean?
If I was treated as despicably as your majesty has been, I would never forget those who were responsible.
In response, Edward tells CL that he thinks he's very strong.
You're strong. Stronger than most.
The two of them have a little bit of a quiet moment. Meanwhile, Sebastian has basically figured out that Richard is keeping some secret with the scary human skull that he's carrying around with him. And so after dinner and some more antics, CL and Sebastian reunite with each other and basically go down to explore the catacombs of the castle. And that's where they meet Edward again. And Edward shows off this chessboard made out of human skulls with one skull missing. This chessboard is basically supposed to be their ticket out of there. Every single skull correlates to a different member of their family. They have their father, their mother, everyone that was important to them is all lined up except for the skull that Richard is carrying, which is supposed to be his own. And I think the implicit understanding here is that if they manage to complete the board, they'll be able to finally ascend to heaven. But they've been stuck in here for 400 years. And Edward doesn't want to take the skull from him. He doesn't want to make his brother cry because he's under the impression that the skull is some sort of comfort object towards Richard. And so CL and Sebastian think about it for like 5 seconds, and then CL goes, "Sebastian, this is an order. You take that little boy's comfort skull. I am tired of having to tie my own shoelaces and confront my emotions. Take it!" And so he does, and we're treated with this really uncomfortable scene of Sebastian manhandling this screaming, crying
sorry,
9-year-old, while Edward like stands in the corner, shaking quietly, going like, Richard, no, Well, Ciel's like, this is the only way. This is the only way. Don't you dare interfere. This is the only way. Well, Sebastian is mugging a 9-year-old. In front of his brother, and it's awful. It's really uncomfortable. It's one of those moments where you're like, are Ciel and Sebastian, are they nice people? And the answer obviously is no, they aren't, but it's incredibly apparent in this scene. But then Richard reveals something very interesting. See, it wasn't that he was keeping that skull because it brought him any sense of comfort. He was keeping it because of the secret within it. The secret was, the skull was meaningless. In fact, the bones that they found that they had falsely attributed to themselves, they weren't the right bones. Edward doesn't know where his body is, and neither does Richard. The skull wasn't even a part of their family. It was just some random skull that died. And that was because Richard and Edward's bodies were thrown in the Thames after they were chopped into little tiny pieces. They have ceased to exist entirely, and so their ghosts have nothing anchoring them to the mortal world. And that means that they are still stuck to the mortal world, but there's no clear way for them to get back. Every single piece of what was once them has ceased to be. It's almost kind of like how Edward's memories of that time have also disappeared. He's a ghost existing without any sort of purpose at all, and he doesn't know how to get back. And Richard knew that, but Richard didn't want to scare his brother. He didn't want his brother to think it was entirely hopeless, so he let his brother believe that for 400 years, he was being kind and merciful by not separating Richard from his favorite skull. And so finally, the memories come rushing back to Edward. The reason he hated liars so much was because for the time that they were staying in that tower, they were watched over by this guard. And this guard lied to them and told them that they would be safe of him. But then he let in killers, and the two of them were murdered in the night. And as the older brother laid there in his own blood, he watched as his younger brother, screaming and crying, was pulled away. And he never wanted to hear that ever again. In his grief, Edward turns to Ciel, and he laments that Ciel was right. That Edward had still hung on to that hatred, and that he would never been able to protect his little brother, and he'd never forgiven himself for that. And so the only way that his ghost could be released was if he found some form of closure.
How could I forget the night I failed to protect you?
Brother,
I've spent so much time hating lies, and all the while I was the one lying to myself and Richard.
look, brother!
And he did. By finally facing the memories and realizing how truly angry he was that he had been killed, that his life had been snuffed short, he was finally able to set his spirit and his brother's spirit free. At the base of the river, the two of them say their final goodbyes to Ciel and Sebastian before boarding a small rowboat led by a ghostly figure and disappearing into the night. Their spirits have been released. Ciel and Sebastian immediately go back to gentrifying that house, and before he left, Edward told Ciel, hey, you better take good care of it. And Ciel was like, of course I will, definitely. And then they go back to tearing the walls down, and you hear just this very faint little whisper in Ciel's ear.
You liar.
And that was a play-by-play of episode 16, which, I really wish I could just, break into your house, turn on the TV, and force you to watch it, because it is a really good episode. It is the episode that I enjoy coming back to the most out of all the episodes in Season 1, and it doesn't even have my boy Ashlander, so that's really saying something. The episode acts as a little bit of a stepping stone between the Curry arc and the Colt arc. And as you know about the last 6 episodes of Black Butler Season 1, shit hits the fan. And while you might just be able to say this is a simple breather filler, placeholder, stock plot, it's actually really significant in just what it says about the characters. Throughout season 1, Ciel is constantly at odds with basically the entire premise of his revenge. Throughout the Colt arc, Angela literally cracks his brain open and goes through his memories of her little dirty angel hands, trying to make him want to call back on his need for vengeance. She tries to bring him closure by bringing him together with his parents, and yet he rejects it because he believes if he were to do that, then the person he's been since that day disappears along with it.
Need to mourn us anymore. You can abandon your grief.
An angel's powers leave the past unchanged. They simply manipulate a person's impression of it, offering a rosier view of things than before.
You're lying. Liar! My mother and father were killed! We were. But in that moment, we saw a bright light. So much. After that, hatred was all I had left.
Why don't you just let it go?
I can't!
I see Ciel.
If I let go of hatred, then the person I've been since that day disappears with it.
And then you go into the last arc where Sebastian just up and fucking leaves him. And without a contract, Ciel is stuck suddenly wondering what he's gonna do with his life. Where does he go? He remembers Aberline's words. That's right, Aberline, the man who was trying so very hard to break Ciel from his path of vengeance. Aberline's words fail to reach him.
You do have a chance, Ciel, to move forward and build a brand new future for yourself. Don't ever forget that.
And even now, once he's completely detached from Sebastian, Ciel still comes crawling back because he doesn't see a future for himself without Sebastian and without his revenge. And I feel like this little storyline with Edward is a very great microcosm of what revenge actually means. Because for Edward, there was no point of revenge. Edward's enemies were all already dead, and even though he was finally acknowledging how much he hated them, he still didn't want to, go down to hell and beat the shit out of them. He knew they were dead, he knew the moment had passed, he knew there was nothing he could do. And Ciel wishes there was stuff that he could do, but in the end, that's not what's going to leave his spirit to rest. Ciel needs to heal. That's what this concept of revenge is. It's not so much vengeance as closure. He needs to finally be able to put the past behind himself, and the only fail-safe method of doing so is to do the only thing he can, and that's drive vengeance into the people who hurt him.
But there is no future for me, because I gave it away.
Edward was right. He is a liar. He could not sustain himself on the false paradise that Angela presented to him. And neither could he disappear so easily as Edward because Sebastian was fucking stuck to him. If closure was the same as putting a spirit to rest, then there's no way in hell Ciel's ever going to be able to do that because Sebastian is right there. Sebastian doesn't want him to reach closure. Sebastian wants him to reach perfection. And that perfection, that hatred and anger and feeling of loss and emptiness and all of these terrible, terrible pieces of darkness that are driving him towards it, this isn't going to heal him. It's like what Aberline said later on. Aberline tried to show Ciel that he still had a choice, that he could still live his life in the way Edward couldn't. That while Edward was dead and all of his pain was something washed away by the Thames, Ciel was alive. And he too could let go of his pain and move forward. But he just couldn't. He couldn't. And that's the real crux of Black Butler. Ciel can't find closure. He only has revenge. And the reason for that is because of some fucking demon. That got a little intense. It's about to get worse. So, manga spoilers from this point onwards. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Ciel is a twin. Ciel has a brother. Ciel specifically is a younger brother of a twin. So, I think that suddenly makes this brother dynamic a whole lot worse because, well, let's jump forward a little bit. Black Butler Season 2. Black Butler Season 2 is laughing at you and at the normal season, and specifically at this episode. Because think of it. Think about it. In this episode, we were introduced to the concept of this blonde hair, blue-eyed, long eyelash kid with a green color scheme and a bit of a chess motif who wants to be addressed as Your Majesty. I really think when they were coming up with season 2, they were like, okay, is there any plot from season 1 that we could recycle, any at all? And then their heads all snapped around to this one, and they went, okay, let's do this again, but make it worse and give the kid a fucked up demon butler. Obviously, Richard and Luca are like borderline the same character design. I mean, obviously Luca looks different, but like, you know, they both fit the same role of the gigantic, bug-eyed baby boy trying to help his older brother, to a T, you know? We should also just take a moment to think about what Aloise is actually supposed to be a representation of. And, okay, this is getting into my season 2 video, so I highly recommend that you, watch that if you want this to make any sense. But if you haven't, I'll just try and paraphrase. Basically, I'm under the correct opinion that Aloise's existence was a very, very strange way of foreshadowing real Ciel, because, I mean, come on. Their hair swoops in the same direction. They're both followed by a very strange man who usually wears glasses, but specifically has removed them for specific reasons. I'm talking about Claude and Undertaker. They both have, you know, little brothers that have caused them some immense form of either guilt or I don't know what real Ciel has going on, but and thematically they're both characters that are trying to get in Sebastian's way, not Ciel's way. Like, Aloise wants Ciel, but he specifically wants Ciel so he can screw over Sebastian. Metaphorically, Claude's the one screwing Sebastian over. That entire tangent aside, I feel like what Aloise was trying to do is kind of more or less a season-long version of what Edward was trying to do. Because, like, okay, Ciel and Ciel, Edward and Richard, Aloise and Luca. All of these characters have a lot of very weird shit in common. I do not think Aloise would exist if the Edward and Richard episode had not happened the way it did. And already Edward is like similar enough in design to Aloise for it to be just enough, just weird enough. And then you add in the fact that like Sebastian's disguise when he was serving Edward and Richard was like almost identical to the original design that Claude was put in. So not only is Edward this parallel of Ciel, this parallel that doesn't seek vengeance but seeks closure, who wants so very badly to protect his poor little brother, whose final scene is him holding his brother close as they both fade away. Not only is Edward that, but Edward is also the prototype of Aloise Trancy, who is more or less real Ciel in a different font. And I know not everyone likes to consume their shows by laying out a red string corkboard between all the characters of all the different media properties, but I do, and this is my channel. So what the hell does this imply for the manga? What does this mean? Well, they all impact the story in kind of a different way, you know? Like, Edward's whole thing is about closure and specifically putting the dead to rest. Aloise's whole arc is about realizing that Claude and Sebastian are not true givers of love and instead stripping Ciel from this contract and honest to God, setting him free? So, amid these blonde boys, what path will real Ciel go down? I'm gonna stop myself before I get too into that, because this miniseries is not over and I have a lot more horrifying implications to make. But there's still, like, some stuff I want to talk about. So, behold, 5 facts you didn't know about Edward and Richard from Black Butler. Number 1. Edward is mostly green in his color scheme, which is a trait that he shares with Aloise Trancy. Number 2. There are actually 3 Eddies in Black Butler. There's Edward V, Edward Midford, and then Edgar Redmond. That's actually 2 Eds, you know? Edgar Redmond. So that's 4 Eds. Edward is also kind of similar to Siglinde from the manga. Actually, she'll be in the anime pretty soon if we get greenlit for the, you know, Emerald Witch arc. But basically, to be as vague as possible, she's also a lady with a green color scheme who Ciel, under circumstances, ends up trading butlers with, or, I mean, giving Sebastian to, or, you know, Sebastian gets swapped once or twice. Another interesting thing I noticed about this was this one comment that Edward gives.
Thrown in here and forgotten by even the Grim Reaper.
And so what he means by that, as in they've been forgotten by the Grim Reaper, it really just does imply that ghosts happen when Grim Reapers aren't there to reap the souls, which completely ties into my Drossel video theory. So, oh my god, the lore of Black Butler is so... wow. I was right for once, wow. And I don't like it because the characters are anime, so they can, like... could they please, like, animeify the paintings at least? This has very uncomfortable implications. I don't like looking at a real, actual human person on a Black Butler episode. Please stop. And then, my last little fun fact about this whole, you know, situation is, Edward and Richard are some of the only characters that are not directly affiliated with Ashlanders, which I think is interesting because, you know, there's one more character that parallels real Ciel, and that character is directly affiliated with our favorite horrible angel.
So, I dropped my microphone. It's at my parents' place, so currently I have to, you know, wait for that to come back. So I don't have it, so this little outro thing is being recorded on a very shitty PC mic, so I'm gonna keep it short. Thank you everyone for watching. This was very interesting. Now go watch episode 16. Legally. I don't care what you do. I'd sell my own bones for sapphire stones, 'cause blue's your favorite color. Pieces of my skull.